the fifth episode of Future in Focus series for the Global Treasurer with Standard Chartered. I'm Victoria Claverie. I'm the Head of Trade for Europe at Standard Chartered. And today I'm joined by Julie Fabris, Global Director of FP&A and Treasurer at Braintax Group, and Tim de Knecht, Treasurer and Manager of Strategic Finance and Treasury at Port of Rotterdam. Today, we're discussing how corporates are increasingly viewing sustainability in supply chain as a key priority and are looking to regulators, banking partners, and other parties in supply chain to support sustainable practices and define global standards. Julie, if I can start with you, what are the first steps treasurers should take to factor in sustainability into their procurement supply chain processes?
That's a really interesting subject and such a great time for a treasurer to sort of get involved. I think the first steps, if you're not familiar with what's happening in your organization, is to find out what is happening in your organization. Because I think there's a lot of people that are probably getting involved. Does your company have a sustainability sort of like a committee, for example, or ESG committee? Is there a sort of like a leader of that? So it's really establishing within your organization, is there someone in charge of the whole thing that you can speak to? And as a treasurer, you can bring along, and I think a lot of value in understanding that, hopefully already involved in supply chain with all of the shocks going on at the moment. But, it's actually getting a seat at the table. It's where does your position as a treasurer lie within the organisation under ESG, and trying to understand that and get support for that, because you can bring a lot to the table, of course, with all of the alternative funding around sort of targets, etc. out there. So, yeah, that's what I would advise.
Thank you, Julie. How about Tim?
In conjunction with what Julie just said, I think understanding who is in charge in the company, understanding what is already being done is very, very important as a starting point. I think in addition to that, together with your colleagues, figuring out kind of where it is that you can really make a difference as a company, and then understanding from a treasury perspective how you can add to that value being created, and really kind of helping to make a dent in that ESG topic.
Thank you, Tim. And I think that's super interesting. And linking the next question to what you've just said, how do you measure the impact of ESG initiatives?
I think, across the globe, there are several different initiatives around measuring impact. Within the Port of Rotterdam, we make use of a model being developed by a company called Impact Institute, who make use of the methodology of the Harvard methodology in that sense. And I think you see a lot of these methodologies kind of converging, coming together, and hopefully in due course we will have one methodology that will support us analyze and envisage kind of where the impact is that your company is making, if that's on the natural side, if it's on the production side, if it's on the financial side, and really understanding your role within the supply chain. And then the next step is the attribution that is being done to your company, and then the next step there is really understanding what you can do with your function as an individual to make a difference.
Thank you. And Julie, what has been your experience at Braintax in this respect?
Well, I mean, we do have a sort of established sort of sustainability agenda and lead, and within sort of like a manufacturing company like ourselves, we produce children's children's car seats and strollers. And so at the very heart of obviously there's a lot within the supply chain to consider. There's the direct and the indirect consequences of a manufacturing business as well. So, we have, I think it's probably fair to say that we're doing our bit, but when it comes to the reporting, measurement and the financial metrics, it's a little bit of a minefield out there. If I was to be completely honest, and, this is something that is not particularly standardized. I mean, the carbon emission footprint is kind of like a bit of the easier one to tick off. But then other things, for example, in our research and development capabilities, we've just launched a recyclable, cover for the car seat, a green cover we call it. So things are being done, but in terms of strict sort of measurements, I see that the standardized reporting of that and measurement, because my background is accountancy, like most treasurers. At the end of the day, it's how you then measure that in a way that you can then demonstrate and have the sort of like confidence, if you like, that you are getting there, or you are getting there and reaching a goal. And that way, I think there needs to be a little bit of a outside help and perhaps more standardization in measurement.
Thank you. Now, coming from when you say outside help, to enable sustainable trade finance and practices, what role do you think banks and potentially other vendors play in enabling this for their corporate clients like yourselves?
We meet with them regularly. The topic comes up more or less of how they're sort of like gaining traction, and and how they are really communicating to us to say, well, it's coming. We need to think about this as an organization. We're only funding those companies now going forward that have sort of like a benchmark. So is it sort of like a carrot or a stick approach? I'm not quite sure, but I hope that there can be a bit more help in actually that drive forward, and I think it's getting there. I can see that support there, and not least the banks themselves, whilst treasurers love the KYC process in terms of the financial governance of everything. I think the social governance, I think there's going to be KYC checks done on corporate sustainability going forward, and I do feel this is going to come in the next couple of years. So it needs to be very much on the forefront of a treasurer's mind, and to get that information as well ready to communicate with the banks, because you're not only going to report on financial performance, you're going to start reporting on sustainability performance as well.
Thank you. How about you, Tim?
As Julie said, I think that the role that banks play is a very, very important one, not just from a supplier perspective, but also as banks have a very clear third-party authentication role, a facilitating role within that supply chain, and that is very much about bringing parties together, so understanding what is happening within that supply chain and bringing parties together to make a difference. So, for instance, as an example, we have quite a large shore power initiative to electrify ships coming into Rotterdam, so that their engines are not running while they're unloading and loading. And this is something where a bank can also take a view on how important they deem that, and they can support specific clients both on the shore side of things as well as on the water side of things, on the nautical side of things, to make this happen. And what you see quite frequently is that obviously on both sides there's different parties, different financiers, different banks, and it's fairly kind of fragmented to bring them together. So really understanding what you're looking at, and the fact that you have to kind of bring these parties together within the supply chain is an important topic, and I think that banks can play a very important role in that transition as well.
Absolutely, I'm absolutely with you. I think banks are really looking into sustainable trade finance at Standard Chartered. We're clearly a big step ahead, talking with all our clients, understanding exactly what you've just said. How do they work together with their suppliers, with their distribution channels? What are their ESG commitments? How are they looking to work towards net zero, and how we transition or help them transition towards those goals? So super relevant. Now, Tim, when you were mentioning about obviously you're at the port, so you're at the forefront, or really looking at the supply chain squeeze. So what lessons can be learned from the current supply chain squeeze, looking at it from the port side?
One of the major learnings that we've had from the supply chain squeeze is that although it's happened quite kind of ad hoc, we do feel that the way that it's structured right now and the integration of the supply chain, or exactly the lack of integration, means that it will most likely happen more often going forward. And I think that also means that we need to be a lot more flexible, a lot more nimble as companies, but at the same time work much more closer together with the parties within our supply chain. And so we need to really understand what is happening in our supply chain to be able to identify those elements where certain instances like this and certain hiccups might occur. How can we identify them, and how can we kind of ensure that we tackle them in the right manner, so that kind of the extent that we see today will not happen in the future.
How about you, Julie? How has Braintax experienced the shock?
Well, it's been a little bit unprecedented. I wouldn't, play it down too much. The headwinds on inflationary costs, as well as the actual sort of physicality of the of getting the goods across the water, which has been a sort of like a trying time for us. What we've done is that we are working with with our suppliers very closely. And I think it shows how fragile and how constant. You can be concentrated on, or reliable on a particular supplier. So, we constantly evaluate our sourcing in any case. I think, what it does is it's highlighted the visibility, because where, certain of our suppliers have come unstuck because they're suffering with cash flow constraints because they can't ship goods. It's how we can then, help each other. And I would say actually, as a result of the pandemic, I think we were quite pleased that, when you look back sort of like nearly 2 years ago, when in March and April, when the world was kind of falling apart a little bit, it was quite nice to see how everyone sort of came together. Suppliers were still paying, your customers still paying on time. You're able to pay your suppliers on time. That whole trading pattern didn't actually fall apart as badly as you thought. And it helped us forge stronger relationships with suppliers and get that visibility about going up their supply chain. And I think when it comes back to ESG and sustainability, that has kind of like opened doors for them to collude with us to try and work together. So it's been reasonably positive, I think.
Thank you. So what practical steps can you take to help manage supply chain shocks in the future?
What can you do? All you can do is manage as much as possible and plan ahead as much as possible. And when I say plan, look at your legal contracts with your suppliers. Are there clauses in there where, they can change things, or is there in terms of availability or pricing? And look at, continuously look at sort of like, the sourcing of your suppliers as well, which is something any good manufacturing organization does.
Thank you. Tim?
I think in addition to what Julie said, I think the element that is really important is understanding where the challenges lay within your supply chain, understanding kind of where the volatility is, or where the volatility might arise, and have a plan B and a plan C, and in certain cases even a plan D. And I think really understanding where you are vulnerable and then having a plan is extremely important. And you don't need a plan for everything, but you need to be, just like with your FX exposures or your interest exposures, you need to know where those vulnerabilities are, and you need to have a plan.
Plan it is. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim and Julie, for sharing such valuable insights. And thank you to our audience for listening to this episode of The Future in Focus by the Global Treasurer.
Thank you.
Thank you.